So you're probably wondering, what are the latest trends in giving? And in this short video, I want to share a few trends that are worthy of our attention. First, some good news. Did you know that currently people are giving about $500 billion a year to charity? Yeah, that's $500 billion is going to charity every year. And church is actually getting a meaningful percentage of that. About $100 billion is currently going to churches, which is pretty amazing. That's an average of over $300,000 per church. So good news, there's lots of money, people are giving it. Now, where the challenge comes in is when you really look, you can look at this two ways. You can look at it like, oh, people aren't giving what they could, or you could look at there's so much room to grow here. So what's fascinating about that, 67% of all the money donated in the United States came from individual donors, and 27% of those funds went to religious organizations. So this is where it starts to be a bit of a double-edged sword, because you're like, ooh, only a quarter went to religious organizations. Okay, we could do a little bit more than that, and I think that's good. Now, when you drill down, how much, because this is the question most leaders ask, how much is your congregation actually giving? So according to Overflow, a fintech startup out of Silicon Valley, only 5 to 10% of church attenders tithe. So if you look at the average income and then the average gift in a church, which is about $2,800 a year, most people are making more than $28,000 a year. Not saying that that isn't sacrificial for some people. If you're a single parent, if you're unhoused, that could be like giving more than the top donor in your church. But on average, $2,800 a year. And that means that probably about 5 to 10% of the people who give to your church are actually tithing. So what that means, first of all, a little bit depressing. Secondly, lots of upside potential. So what do you begin to do? Well, here comes some more good news. First of all, 90% of millennials, so those are basically midlife people right now, right? They're between their late 20s and their early 40s. 90% of millennials consider charitable giving an essential part of their lives. So they're pretty charitably disposed. Now, maybe only 5-10% of them are actually tithing, but that creates an education opportunity for you and a call to discipleship, a call to radical commitment, and a call to live their life differently than the rest of the world. So now, one of the things that's going to be a challenge for a lot of churches is people want to know, where is my money going? So of the money that's going to churches, 7 out of $10 go directly into staff and facilities. Now, I led a church for 20 years. I don't think that's the end of the world. Obviously, a facility is a means to an end, and the staff are actually part of the ministry. We enable sometimes dozens, hundreds, thousands of volunteers to live out their calling, and that's what we do. But you've got to think about that. If people think of that as overhead, they're like, yeah, I don't want to give to that cause. On the other hand, you know that if there is nobody serving in any kind of a capacity in leadership, then you're not going to have much of a church. So the way we would often do that is we would allocate certain staff positions that were not admin directly to ministry. So the family ministry staff team, in addition to the hundreds of volunteers that serve, that actually went into family ministry and was considered ministry. Now, if you've got an exec or administrative pastor or a bookkeeper or a receptionist or anything like that that is truly admin, you got to think about that as admin. So you really want to think about that, and you want transparent accounting. You really want to have reporting because people want to see. They want to see through the glass door. They want to see. You don't have to divulge, confidential salaries, et cetera, but you need to be able to accurately and honestly share how much is going to overhead, what's going into ministry, what's going into mission, what's going into outreach, et cetera. So think about that. And then here's the real upside. So do you know that money alone, like cash, money in the bank, liquid cash, represents less than 10% of all wealth in America? Now, here's the reality. The vast majority, 90% of people give out of income, not out of wealth. So what do you do with that? It's like, if only 10%, do you see the challenge there? If only 10% of everything that accrues to people's net worth is actually cash, because it's tied up in real estate, it's tied up in investments, it's tied up in stocks, it's tied up in bonds, et cetera, If 90% of what they have is not liquid cash, but 90% of their giving comes from the cash they have or don't have in many cases, you can see that there's a bit of a disparity. So what do? You've got to start thinking about moving the giving conversation from not just giving from income, but giving from wealth. So if you start to do that, I mean, amazing things can start to happen, because people will say, oh, I get like some tax advantages by giving stocks. Yeah, you totally do. But they've never thought about giving stocks. Some people still hold crypto, right? And it's like, yeah, I profited really well on Ethereum over the years. Okay, I'd love to give some of that to the church, but they don't know how. That's why companies like Overflow are making that really easy. And if you want to learn more, you can go to overflow.co. See, when people start to really give from their wealth, not just from their income, then giving compounds. And when you hear about like $1 million gifts to the local hospital or $10 million gifts to some university, those people aren't giving out of cash reserves. Those people 9 times out of 10 have sold some land, they've sold some stock, and they're like, we're going to give this out of what we have. Now, when you listen to that, you're like, oh, this doesn't sound very biblical. Actually, it sounds very biblical. It sounds like the book of Acts, where people are like actually selling their land and they're bringing the proceeds and giving it to the apostles. And they're like, okay, further the kingdom. So that's actually happening. And in Luke chapter 8, you actually see that Jesus was being supported in his ministry by, it seems, women of wealthy households. And that's how he funded his ministry. That's actually in the Bible. So we're not talking about stuff that we're just making up or like, ooh, I don't know that we should get into that. The church has been doing this for thousands of years. Now, the other thing you can do, so number one, switch some of the giving conversation in your church from just income to also wealth, and say, well, what about stocks? What about real estate? And then position yourself to receive those. That will free up literally 90% of what people hold, and they will give a portion of that to your church. The second thing you can do is move people to online giving. Again, according to Overflow, 39% of online donors are weekly givers. Now, there's also a gap for the church. About 80% of commerce that happens today happens electronically. It happens on your phone. That's what happens. Okay, so people are like Venmoing money. They're doing e-transfers depending on where you are. They're doing wire transfers. That's how money moves today. Very few people operate on cash and checks anymore. 80% of all commerce done in America is done digitally. You know how much giving is digital in the church? About 40%. So we're like years behind, maybe a decade and a half behind the culture on that. So if you put a push on for online giving and you just ask people, hey, automate what's important, automate what matters. We did that over a decade ago now in our church, and we moved from 30% online giving to over 70% online giving. And that was a decade ago. That was in the early 2010s. Now it's over 90% online giving. When you do that, 2 things happen. Number one, people have to think very intentionally about what they give. Secondly, it becomes more automated, and people still have control, right? They can stop payment, they can adjust up or down depending on their life circumstances, but you got to get with the culture and move people into online giving. Okay, so those are some church giving statistics for 2024 I hope can guide you. And if you want to learn more, I would love to get my free guide of 2024 church trends to you and your team. It's designed for personal study, team study, to you for free. You can simply click the link and get my 2024 church trends guide for you and your team. Hope this helped. Leave a comment about what you're learning about giving, or leave a question, and we'll see you in the comments.